Greetings and salutations, everybody. I have another little remake review here to throw your way, but before we dive in, just know that immediately before watching this, I had watched The Wild Women of Wongo via Elvira's movie Macabre, which I will link to that video at the end, so that may have altered my perception of this film for the better. Anyways, as it had been almost 10 years, I figured it was time for me to revisit the 2014 remake of Robocop, which stars Joel Kinnaman, Gary Oldman, Michael Keaton, Jackie Earle Haley, and also features Jay Baruchel, Michael K. Williams, and Samuel L. Jackson. A lot of talent there, and the synopsis for this remake is as follows. In 2028 Detroit, when Alex Murphy, a loving husband, father, and good cop, is critically injured in the line of duty, the multinational conglomerate OmniCorp sees their chance for a part-man, part-robot police officer. So we have a similar story to the original, but this failed to relaunch the franchise, and I couldn't really figure out why until this latest rewatch. All in all, they tried to stick to the major points, bring in the aspect of having some better visual effects, to really flesh this out a bit, which is great. With this, we get the idea of, cyborg cop, who's better than regular cops, but more personable and human than a simple machine. We get a touch of propaganda, a lot of stuff kind of playing like a newsreel in a way, and we get corporate and police corruption and so on. We have family issues. Where does being a human stop and being a machine begin? But anyways, first off, they really did well with the visual effects. So we get a great mix of digital and practical used where needed. I felt it was really balanced, in my opinion at least. It looks really great, and it adds this action effects aspect to it, which wasn't able to take place to this extent in the original. We also get some really great performances, great actors in this, and everybody does very well with the material they are given. And they updated some other aspects, such as concerns about drones and privacy and so forth. But I remember seeing this one in the theater, kind of enjoying it, buying it on Blu-ray, watched it at home, kind of enjoyed it there too, but I hadn't revisited this one in almost 10 years. Because not only did this fail to relaunch the franchise, but I couldn't figure out until recently why I and most people seem to just forget that this film even exists. Until on this rewatch. So, as I've said some of those good things, here's what I figured out about why this one didn't work. In my opinion, what went wrong, and it isn't just this film which failed. So out of all the other content, I will make the most direct comparisons to the original with Peter Weller. And here's what stood out from that original, which they didn't really bring to the remake. First one being torture. Now stay with me on this, but when Murphy's taken out in the original, he's tortured. He's shot up while he has a bulletproof vest on. His arm is taken off, he's teased, he's mocked, and it made me, as an audience member of that original, want to see him get revenge and bring these people to justice. It just really got me all fired up. This one is just a car bomb. The antagonists, in the original is more clear about who these bad guys were, wanting to see them get what they deserve, what their association with OCP was, and we're just on board. This one, it's not as clear. It's a bit more complicated and convoluted. The sense of self. Robocop not having any memories in the original, is being seen as legally dead, works very well in that we got his own personal mystery as his partner, who we have a better relationship, it's a better duo than in this remake, keeps us interested not just in tracking down the antagonist and serving justice, but wanting him to remember who he was, even with that tragedy of him losing his family, since they all think he's dead. We barely get any of that in this film. Also the violence, and violence doesn't make a film, but when it's used right, it can. While the effects were great for the time in the original, it's the action and the violence that would punctuate every scene. It stood out better, made it more exciting. We'd have a storyline, we would have some action, something would go over the top, and then it'd bring us back into the rest of that story, so we're always interested. This one is just a bit so-so. Nothing is shocking or over the top, and some of the scenes with the action, it's like they just kept piling it on until I was desensitized and got a little bit bored with it. And also the propaganda. So it was much more blatant in the original, like the director did later on with Starship Troopers as well. It was borderline comedic then and more relatable as being so possible, like an amplification of what we would see sensationalized on the news in the 80s. This one tried to just keep it a little bit more grounded, where it wouldn't be unheard of to see similar kind of propaganda on TV just as a news report. It's kind of hard to explain, but it just didn't stand out as anything all that interesting. Now, in this remake, he never really loses his memory. His family knows exactly what's going on with him, so does his partner. So there's no internal mystery there. there's no tragedy along the same line, and especially no tragedy along the lines of how he was killed, or borderline killed in this case. Simple car bomb, no torture, teasing or mocking, the enemy having just planted a bomb which distances themselves from him. And while we get to, him being Robocop pretty quickly in this story, there's too much time in their testing and tweaking of him as Robocop. Because this newer film, which is just shy of 2 hours, spends a good hour of that just not really feeling like it's moving the story forward. It ends up a bit shoddy and stuttered at points, lots of stop and go with the only action scenes pulling us along, kind of going on a little bit too long as well. I was just kind of over it. Now, it does have its moments, but like the remake of The Omen or the remake of Ghostbusters, if somebody's interested in them at all, watching the original is a better choice because it's still very entertaining and actually works better as a film in general. However, this one still does have its moments, got great acting, great effects, so-so story, but nothing to write home about, which is likely why it is borderline forgotten these days, as it failed, and why it failed to bring this franchise back. But I don't think it's just this film and how they produced it to blame. I think this was just another attempt that didn't do well, because there were 2 sequels to the original film, 2 TV shows, and a cartoon. There may be more, but that's all I could kind of find out about. And none of those had ever lived up to the original back then. I remember part 2 being decent, but I never really got around to really rewatching it, such as back then collecting Laserdiscs and then DVDs and then Blu-rays. I just never really went back to it. Part 3, which I believe was PG-13 because they were trying to get a younger audience to fill some of those seats, I remember really not enjoying that one at all. I think I only watched it one time. And I never even decided to check out any of the TV shows, all of which just kind of barely lasted long, like maybe 8 or 10 episodes. And they're not highly regarded. I think this shows that the original Robocop basically did all they could do with this concept when they brought it to the screen, and they brought it to the screen perfectly. All those aspects I mentioned earlier about wanting revenge, knowing who the antagonists are, having a better relationship with his partner, no matter how short of a time they had together. His internal mystery about his background, losing his memory, losing his family, it all balanced that concept in the original film much better. But without that, whether in a sequel, a TV show, a cartoon, or even in this reboot, the concept just simply doesn't work that well. Now don't get me wrong, this is leaps and bounds better than the Poltergeist remake or the Fright Night 2 New Blood, the sequel remake to Fright Night. But all in all, it's just kind of barely worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this admittedly negative take on the Robocop remake. Like I said, I usually don't like to go negative, but at least I did find a couple of positive things to say. Good acting, good action, good effects. Just some of the action went on too long, the story wasn't as compelling, and the characters weren't fleshed out as well. Still best to go with the original. But anyways, like I said, I hope I at least touched on those good points enough to make this feel a bit more balanced in the aspects I didn't enjoy versus what I did. But aside from wanting to revisit this one, I wanted to figure out why it just didn't seem to do well. And I think I did figure that out. Anyways, what about you though? What are your thoughts on this franchise and this remake, especially if you were a fan of the first film and ever saw any of the content afterwards, such as this remake? What did you think? Sound off in those comments. Anyways, that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for coming by and for sticking around to the end, as it really helps out quite a bit. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.
I'd buy that for $1.